This is your Daily Dose with Dr. D. Here's Dr. Daniela Schreier.
I'm Dr. Daniela, and you're here to get your daily dose on crime time. So yesterday you did ask me to produce a podcast and to summarize some of the findings or observations that I made during the second day when we had expert testimony. So I was very interested in the cross-examination because I think that was the opportunity for the prosecution to point out potentially some discrepancies that the defense had not addressed. And it was very interesting because many of the items that Juan Martinez, the prosecutor, brought up, I had spoken about in the podcast that I had brought out the Friday before. So number one, I think Juan Martinez brought up very nicely asking the expert, well, are you an expert witness? That means, are you presenting on data, or actually did you provide treatment for the defendant? There is a difference, as I explained to you. An expert witness is not a therapist to the client. The expert witness gets objective data, does a very detailed interview, and as we know, interviews are not very yielding. We're doing a series of testing batteries. So he pointed out, it means Juan Martinez pointed out the discrepancy because it appeared to me also a little bit blurry what was done. So Juan Martinez brought up that there was actually a book sent from the expert to the defendant. There were 2 cards exchanged, and well, it is not very customary, let's say it like that. Then the next step that he also said was, well, when we are looking into the testing that has been done, there were only 2 tests done, and that was kind of, for me, you want to have a series of tests so you can yield your findings, and if they all actually go towards the same direction, then you have more support in data with your diagnosis. Juan Martinez brought up an interesting point that the first trauma testing was done during a time when the defendant, Jodi-Arias, still came up with an intruder story. So he kind of challenged the expert and said, well, what happened? If the testing took place during a time when stories or lies were still told, would the testing be very valid? So the expert kind of apologized and said, well, I should have re-administered the test. I would say there would be another opportunity. The opportunity would be actually to note in the testing report that the test findings, if the test didn't pick up on it itself, that there was maybe an exaggeration or maybe lying going on, because there are scales like that in every test, then the expert could have written that, well, the test turned out maybe valid, but maybe we cannot give so much consideration to that data because at the same time the defendant was still telling a different story. Furthermore, Juan Martinez also brought up, listen, it's always very difficult to sit in the seat of the expert, especially if you have a gentleman like Juan Martinez who is very passionate but also very well prepared. So he brought also into court kind of a prior violation that the expert might have committed in the state of New Jersey. He did not let that fall through the cracks. And he challenged actually the test findings. Interesting was that he used itemized items from the test and read them to the expert. There are certain tests we can't do that. That means you cannot just rely on the play-by-play, what each question asks. But these questions were very precise, and Juan Martinez brought up, well, Jodi-Arias, for example, did not endorse that she has suffered sexual or violent abuse by the hands of someone that she would have known, and that means Travis Alexander, she knew, and in court it was brought up that one time he might have penetrated her while she slept. That would have counted, logically, legally, it could have counted towards rape, but obviously on the test findings, she didn't endorse that. So these are just some of the items that I noticed yesterday that the prosecution really brought up. He brought up kind of the fine blurring of boundaries, and I think the difficulty in this assessment was that normally an assessment would take a couple of weeks to a month. This assessment was stretching over 3 years. In 3 years, people change, right? And generally, an assessment is a snapshot over a shorter period of time. So you can be very concrete with your maybe diagnosis. You can have the test findings also pointing towards that. The fallback here was, or the drawback for the defense or maybe for the expert witness, was really that only 2 tests had been administered, and that is a challenge. We're normally doing a testing battery. Also, if there were different stories told throughout the interview, maybe you would not go back and solicit new stories. That's not the role of the expert. The role of the expert is to do a very precise and detailed interview. And the information is actually written down. Best, it's also recorded. And then you write a report about it. All behavioral patterns are also mentioned. The test findings are mentioned. If the test was valid, how the defendant or the client approached the test. And if there are different stories told, you have to actually note it down into the report that the client maybe was not very cooperative, or the client changed his or her stories. Now, we have not seen the report of the expert, because that's not, for us to see, but certainly the defense and the prosecution have. So this was just my general impression. In summary, it was not a good day for the defense in court yesterday. Thank you so much for being here with me today. My name is Dr. Daniela. You were here to get your daily dose on crime time. I appreciate you. Take care. Bye-bye.
This has been your Daily Dose with Dr. D. For more, go to doctordaniela.com. That's doctordaniela.com.